Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Joy in Our Town. I'm Aaron Motley. We're so glad to have you to join us here today, and we have a very special program today that's going to inform you and to also help you to find out about all the things that's going on in the local community. We have with us on the first portion of the program Pat Morrow, and she is the director of Project Key, and she's going to talk to us today about the challenges faced by students with disabilities. The Faulkner University program works to ensure equal access to a college education by providing services and determining reasonable accommodations for students with physical, sensory, psychological, and cognitive disabilities. We thank you for being with us on Joy in Our Town today.
Nice to be here.
And it is so good to have programs such as this in place, but it brings to mind the fact that there are many students or people who are in Alabama with disabilities of various types who want to get an education. How serious do you see the problem across the state of schools that are not accessing the proper accommodations for students with various disabilities?
We have come many miles I'm in this because of my own son. And back in the early 80s, there was not a lot going on. So we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. It is critical for students with especially cognitive disabilities. We generally know if a student needs to be in a wheelchair or cannot see or cannot hear. But cognitive disabilities, such as learning disabilities, attention deficit disorders, and by the way, that's the largest pool of disabilities in higher education.
I see.
We have others, but that's the largest pool of students. It is critical that they are identified early and start getting, in public schools, we call it special education services, and public schools are required by law to seek out, identify, and serve. But today we have so many more students in private schools and homeschooling, and sometimes they don't have the same information that public school parents have. I really believe that there's always more that we can do, and I know that there's more than we can do. But anyway, I think higher education back in the 80s, I know there were about 12 universities in the nation that were doing disability services.
I see. Now, you're saying that it's really kind of new to deal with the cognitive disabilities. How are higher...
Well, back the IDEA, Individuals with Education Act, was in place in 1978. And that's when public schools started dealing with it. But then you had to have people trained. That's just when the law went into effect. But then, you know, faculty, staff had to get training, etc. And my son was diagnosed in '81. And then I realized that, because we had early diagnostic workup on him, and we knew that he was bright because we had the the diagnosis that indicated that. A lot of problems with reading and writing, and it was not actually until we watched the Donahue show and a psychiatrist from New York was talking about things we were experiencing in our home, and that's when we thought, aha. I have an education background, but was not in education at the time, and I didn't have a clue what we were, dealing with. And both parents and faculty, teachers need to be aware of what to look for, not to let it go too long before you investigate and see if a diagnosis should be made. Once a diagnosis then is made, and these and parents want to send them into higher education, and that was the case with your son as well. What then should happen, in between that time, if you're trying to get him into a situation with higher education? Now, what should the parents
parents look for in that school?
They should look for, if it's a public school, they should look for special education services where they can do remediation of the reading issues and the writing issues. And at the same time, keep them up with content, and that is not an easy thing. I remember thinking, wait a minute, you're still trying to teach him to read and write, and we're in high school now, and he's college bound.
Yes.
And so I just said, when do you change this? And they said, well, we're not sure. And I said, well, I want it changed now. And I want him to get the content, emphasis on that, with accommodations. Didn't have a clue that what I was talking about was essential competencies.
Yes.
Until later.
Okay.
And at that stage, you don't worry so much about the reading and writing. You worry about it's essential to know the history, the science, etc., regardless of whether or not you can write it or read it with your eyes.
Okay.
Which is a new concept for a lot of people, and it's hard for them to understand.
Okay.
But if you equate it to a blind student or a person without their arms and fingers to write with, and yet they're very capable of learning, then you can understand a little better. But that's where a really good diagnostic workup is essential. When the students must really, they cannot, well, let me just say in K-12, under the idea, students sometimes are given, with disabilities, are given a pass on some things, and they modify the curriculum for them, not in all cases, but then they come to higher ed and want the same curriculum modifications. We're not going to do that.
I see.
So what happens in higher ed, and then we'll go back and talk about the diagnosis, is if you're a student who is otherwise qualified to do the work in higher ed and you come through regular admissions, then you should have access to programs and buildings and all of the above.
Yes.
With accommodations in place. Those accommodations must match the diagnosis and the recommendations.
I see. And do we find that most of the colleges in our area are prepared for this?
Some are better prepared than others. Some do really good jobs, and others do just basic 504 ADA plans. But 504 in high school and higher ed are different subparts of the law, and this is an area that parents and students many times do not understand. Again, K-12 school is responsible, seek out, serve, change, whatever. You get to higher ed, this is the way the curriculum is. But we will give you access by way of accommodations, but we're not going to change. You must be able to do the same work.
Okay.
We just have to adjust the way you do it.
Okay. So we're seeing that Faulkner University is probably a little bit further ahead than most of the others.
AUM does a good job.
Okay. Great. Great.
And TSUM is coming, we have a network of higher ed people. We meet and discuss and share information.
Okay. Does that then limit the places where students with disabilities will choose to go to college?
If I were a parent of a student going to college now, I would think in terms of what the disability is. I would seek out a university. All universities must serve a student with disability that comes in under regular admission and is qualified to be there. My good friend Dan Miller up at Jacksonville State has a wonderful program totally, but if I have a student come in who is blind or hearing impaired, I'm on the phone with Dan saying, okay, this is something I haven't dealt with a lot. Would you give me guidance on the technology we need?
Okay.
And, that sort of thing.
Okay, so great. And tell us a little bit about the Project Key and how it's working to make sure that these students are accommodated correctly.
All right. I will talk about how we do it, but I would like for people to understand this is what should be going on in other places.
Right.
Because there are, Faulkner is a private school.
Yes.
We are under Title III of ADA
Right.
and the Rehabilitation Act because we get federal dollars. And most all universities, unless you don't get federal dollars, and that's almost non-existent.
Yes.
But anyway, what we require...
But this can be a model for other schools. So
and
what kind of things?
what we require is, if you're a student with a disability, that you can come on through regular admission, or you can... It's really the smart thing to do to get in touch with my office right now, if you're planning to come in the fall, because you need to know exactly what we require for a diagnosis. And it takes, you have to, find a psychologist or go to rehab services, and I'd like to come back to rehab services in a minute, get a thorough diagnosis, and then get that document to me. And until that comes to me, you are not a qualified student with a disability.
Okay, so they have to get proper documentation to you first, and then they have to find out about the accommodations that's in the school.
I will give an example. A student, we'll say with a written language disorder or and a reading disorder. Sometimes the interesting things about these students, and none of them are exactly alike in the disability area. If a student comes in with severe written language disorder, he may need a note taker. He or she might need a note taker for their classes. We put those in place. We're very careful because of confidentiality, because disability issues are under the Buckley Amendment.
Right.
And we will have, faculty will designate a good peer note taker in a specific class. We hire that person. They bring the notes to us. We get them to the students. If they need their textbooks on tape, we get that.
Okay.
If they need additional time for testing, we put that into place. And all of these are...
Right. They're there whenever, all they have to do is ask what's there, and then it can be, and then you can get it.
The difference between higher ed, and K-12 is, in higher ed, you must ask for it.
I see.
We will not come and seek you out as they do.
Great. Well, I thank you so much for being with us, Pat Morrow, with Project Key, and we thank you for what you're doing and for sharing that information. Many people out there would really benefit from that. Thank you for being with us on the program today. Well, there's more to come on Join Our Town in just a moment, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this portion of Joy in Our Town. We have with us on this portion of the program Herb Vanderberry. He is the director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, NASS, for the state of Alabama. He's talking to us today about the economic impact of agricultural industry on Montgomery and surrounding counties. We thank you for being with us on Joy in Our Town today.
My pleasure to be here.
And I'd like to just start by talking about the census and also looking at some statistics on how the farm industry is affecting the economy here in Alabama. So perhaps you can discuss something with us concerning the 2002 census and what the findings are there.
You bet, Aaron. The Census of Agriculture is conducted every 5 years, and we go out and talk to every known farm operator in the state and in the nation. From that survey that we conduct, we find that agriculture is still alive and well out there. It looks different than it did 50 and 60 years ago. We have only about 44,000 farms now in Alabama, compared with over 200,000 in the early 1900s.
Well, I think we can stop right there and just kind of look at, now that's a big drop.
It is.
What's going on to cause there to be a reduction in the amount of farms that we have in Alabama?
A lot of folks wonder that when they look at our statistics and just look at how agriculture has changed. In a word for agriculture, I would say it's productivity and technology on the farm. It takes fewer and fewer acres of land to produce what we used to produce with quite a bit more land area. Just as in all facets of business, agriculture is no exception, that there have been many advances in technology, not the least of which is just mechanization of agriculture over that time period. So
it doesn't mean that we're losing our farms or that we're losing the products. It's just a matter of the technology is there, that we can do it faster and more efficiently.
That's right, Aaron. That's exactly right. We are losing farm numbers because it's taking fewer of those farms to produce the more or the same amount of product that we used to be able to. The other reason that we have less farmers is because it's very difficult to make a profit in agriculture.
I see.
Farm prices have really been stable over the last 50 or 60 years for some of our most basic commodities that Alabama produces, like cotton, peanuts, corn, and soybeans. So with the farm economics and just the financial well-being of farmers, it's very, very difficult to get into farming today in today's world because of the input costs being so high and the farm prices really not improving a lot over that period.
I see. So what industries would you say would be the highest in the state of Alabama? What are we producing the most?
The largest, by far, contributor to Alabama's agriculture is our poultry industry, in particular our what we call our broiler production or meat-type chicken production. That industry represents about 60% to 2/3 of our total farm gate value of products. We're also a large contributor to peanut production. Not only do we rank 3rd in our meat chicken production, we also rank 3rd in peanut production in the nation. Many people don't know that we're a major catfish production state. We're 2nd in the nation behind Mississippi in catfish sales. So Alabama has a very diverse agriculture. Besides our traditional row crops, our cotton, peanuts, corn, and soybean industry, we have a variety of farms and products that we produce that contribute greatly to the overall economy here.
Let's talk a bit more about those meat products, such as the chicken or the poultry industry. How much is that bringing into the state as far as how the sales are there?
The farm gate value, in other words, what the farmer receives for producing meat-type chickens, is right around $2 billion annually. The total economic impact of that has been described as high as $8 billion by the Poultry and Egg Association here in the state. Auburn University also comes up with the total economic impact, the value added, the processing, the transportation, the retail side, the marketing, all of those additional values that the raw commodity brings in and produces in terms of dollars and jobs for the state of Alabama.
Okay. Now, let's get on to the catfish farming, too. Now, I understand that's actually growing. We're seeing more of that than ever before.
Catfish production in the state is relatively a baby as far as agriculture goes, a fairly new industry. It's been around since really the early 1980s in terms of actually going to a commercial structure. Most of our catfish production is concentrated in West Alabama. The soil types there are very conducive to the pond-type aquaculture and catfish farming that Alabama producers are able to participate in. It's very different than our neighboring state of Mississippi. Most of their catfish production is in the Delta area, where they have very level, same depth type ponds.
Oh, okay.
The geography lends to a very different management and production arena for the Mississippi producers than it does Alabama producers.
Yes.
We do, however, on a per acre basis, we yield higher than our neighboring states of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So our Alabama farmers make the most of what they have out there in catfish production, and that has, as you've pointed out, has grown to about a $100 million industry for catfish alone. And then our other aquaculture species that we have, including some shrimp, some of the crustacean type species of aquaculture, contributes another several $1 million on top of that. So we have become a very prominent producer of catfish and aquaculture for the nation.
Okay. And, you know, we hear a little bit in the news concerning the peach crop, and some even thinking that Alabama should be considered the peach state. How are things looking as far as the peach crop in Alabama?
You're exactly right. Alabama has been known for our good quality of peaches. We are not a top 3 state in peach production in the nation. California and Georgia by far produce more, but Alabama produces a very, very good quality of peaches year in and year out, and most of the production is centered up in the central part of the state, particularly in Chilton County.
Yeah.
In fact, we were just up there yesterday on a tour to the Auburn Research Experiment Center there. And as far as this year's crop, we don't have official numbers out on that yet. We will be publishing in July our first production numbers on that. But Bobby Boozer, who is the Extension Horticulture agent up there at Chilton, has indicated to me that there are several factors that look like are going to impact the crop this year, not the least of which has been weather, including some hail damage that many producers received in April that is going to be difficult for producers to market the crop that has had some hail damage received.
Yeah. So how is that going to affect pricing? Because this is really bottom line when it comes down to what's going on with our farms and the consumer. So how is that going to affect consumer prices?
You know, the story, if we're talking specifically about peaches, we'll just have to see what the size of the crop is going to be, not only in Alabama, but in other states. Locally, if generally what happens, if we have a shortage of peaches, that impacts on higher prices for the for the grower as well as paid by the consumer. We don't know what the size of the crop is yet, so I'm hesitating to say what we're going to see on prices. If the crop is larger, then that tends also to lower the prices for the consumer. But I'm glad you brought up prices to the consumer, because I think it's important, in some of the statistics that we produce show this. We contribute very little of our disposable income to food in this country, compared with some of the other countries that are even our competitors in agriculture and in other trade goods. The numbers that I have seen on that is somewhere around less than 10%. Around 10% of our disposable income goes to food, and that compares with countries like Japan, that are some of our very good trading partners, that have such an inflation rate that they're paying in upwards of close to 20% of their income for food. And that's something that U.S. agriculture is very proud of, in that we've been able to produce the same quantity and even more, and a very high quality, at pretty much not a lot of change for the consumer in their percent of their total disposable income.
But what about with gas prices, of course, still way up there, and transportation and transporting food products from one place to another? Wouldn't that affect the prices in the stores?
It does. It all affects it. In fact, it also affects the farmer's bottom line too, because they use many of those same fuel input